Good evening. Welcome to the Township Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, August 8th. And Mr. Thomas, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There is no.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, if you're accepting, I would make a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Support.
Discussion?
Was
Any
that
discussion?
Mr. Atkins?
Yes, Mr.
Thank you.
Any discussion?
Discussion?
Mr. Massey?
None at this point.
I thought you wanted to add something to the agenda.
Oh, yes. I'd like to add a motion to the agenda.
Well, you want to add a topic,
A
I
topic.
believe.
Vote on the topic.
Okay, what's the topic that you would like to add?
Township Board gives the supervisor and superintendent the authority to execute a cost allocation of the fire department and of any entity and the funds as required for the study.
Okay,
I have no problem with adding that to the motion, Mr. Chair.
let's
the agenda.
figure out
To
where
the
we're going to put it on the agenda. I believe we're going to be short a couple of board members tomorrow evening as well, so some of our discussion tonight will be critical because we have two board members who are going to be out of the area tomorrow, so we're going to try and get consensus on some things that probably needs to happen tonight. But I would say that, I don't know, Mr. Lehman, any place in particular that we think that would fit under operational
Yeah,
issues?
just, I would jump right on, right after public comment, just make it the new item number 4 and then bump
Okay.
everything else back down.
Okay,
Mr.
for tonight's
Atkins
agenda.
needs to
Okay.
approve my motion.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we'll open the floor for public comment, and we'll start in the front of the room and work our way back. After the fire chief, anybody, police chief? Okay. Back of the room? Okay. Seeing no public comment, we'll go to fourth item on the agenda. And first off, I would just like to say that a word of thanks to all those individuals that supported and the firefighters that helped to move forward with our new millage for firefighting and here in the township. I want to stress that no money will be collected immediately, and before any money is ever collected, any millage is collected, we will have a new agreement either worked out with the city, or we're not going to have disproportionate funding program. So if residents are concerned that we're going to be paying more per household than individuals in the city, that isn't going to be the case. So that has to be worked out, and I think what Mr. Massey has to have put on the agenda, if you could say that one more time. If you can pull your microphone down, Mr. Massey, because I couldn't hear you very well, and I want to make sure the public can.
Okay.
But what are you proposing?
I'm proposing that the Township Board give the supervisor and superintendent the authority to execute a cost allocation study of the fire department and of any entities and the funds as required for the study.
Okay, so just for the public to remind them what we're talking about here is that there are entities that develop cost allocation studies, and we're not talking about trying to figure out the cost of running the fire department. We know that. We have 10 years of history of the previous, or 9 years of the previous millage and our operating costs, what have you. We know that. What we're talking about here is an allocation of the funds in terms of how much does it cost to actually have a fire department service the city, how much does it cost to actually service the township.
Is there support on this resolution before we discuss
Well, I
it?
just wanted to make sure the public was clear on what we're talking about, but,
You're absolutely right.
okay. Mr. Lemata?
So, just so that everybody's very clear about what the study is, a few months ago I looked for companies and spoke with some friends who are involved in city management, found that there was a lot of recommendations for a certain company, MGT, a consulting group out of Saginaw. The nice thing is they're only 60 miles from us. I do have some familiarity with them before from years ago in another position. And so you understand what that cost allocation study is. It's pretty intensive. They come in and they look at your entire overall operation. They look to see whether there's reimbursement from your fire department for the water used from your DPW. They look at intensive cost allocations from every bit of labor that goes into managing that fire department. So they'll come and they'll camp out here for a week. They'll look at what it takes from the, treasurer's department to handle millage. They'll look at what my time goes in and just managing with the chief and some of the personnel issues. How long we actually spend on contract negotiations. They'll talk about human resources. How long does it take us to run payroll? What's it like to manage their benefits programs? And what kind of time? It's a very intensive time study. They'll do the same thing. They'll look at, with the city, they'll spend time at the city and would look at them and see if they spend any inordinate amount of time in managing the fire department operations from the city's perspective. They do all that so they can come up with a true picture of exactly what it costs to operate a fire department. And when the results come back to you guys for review, they will make recommendations. They'll also look at things if there's any cost recovery out there that we're leaving money on the table, like pursuing insurance companies when we have to send a Jaws of Life unit or first responders out to help at an accident scene. All of those labor issues get captured in there, and then they really try to come up that they're with 99.9% certainty that they actually have a true picture of what it costs to operate a fire department, from capital needs to labor to lights to water to whatever. And they'll present you different scenarios. Typically a fixed cost of what it costs to have it ready to go, a ready to serve charge, if you will, for 24/7, 365 days a year, staffed fire department. So they would look at that allocation between the township and between the city. Then they'll look at a variable cost, saying how much does it cost, what labor looks like when we go on individual runs, and they'll break that down, and then they would make a recommendation back to you for consideration that you adopt a funding formula that consists of your fixed cost, your ready to serve charge, and then a variable formula that you could look at every 3 years or every 5 years, or adjustable based upon the number of runs, whatever criteria you guys want to use and your partners would agree to. So you actually do get a true cost. Now, one word of caution is that the last time I saw something like this, we came across something that we didn't understand, is that contributions back to the DPW to have fire hydrants and the water ready to go. So those costs will go up a little bit in our fire operation because those aren't being calculated in right now. But again, it's a fair cost. It's what it costs you to operate a fire department. So those do get captured, and then we take that allocation. So if we're going to move forward with something like this, I think it should be a venture that's split. The cost of performing this study is split between the partners, and that we agree ahead of time that we're willing to live with the results, that we're ready to put those in place as part of an agreement moving forward, because that is a true cost allocation if that's what we're trying to get to. And obviously, I don't know what that number is going to be when it comes, but it's intensive. It takes a few months. They'll come, they'll visit with everybody, they'll spend time, they'll really get it right down to the minute how much time we spend over the course of a few years, because negotiations only come up every 3 years, what we spend on attorneys' fees, what we spend on board time even dealing with, what percentage gets allocated towards dealing with fire department issues. It is pretty intensive, but it's an incredible amount of data that comes back as a result for you to make fact-based decisions.
Mr. Mansour?
So, Mr. President, first of all, I would like to support Mr. Massey's motion.
Okay.
And then I would like to ask him if he would be willing to add to his motion a certain amount of dollars to be allocated to this study, and allowing the superintendent to execute the contracts, et cetera, to commission the study.
Mr. Lehman, what was the cost that we're looking at?
Right now, we have a proposal, if we don't change anything in the proposal, at $38,000 to complete the study.
And we're going to ask, is the motion to ask any of our entities that want to participate with us, with fire, to help fund that? Is that the motion, Mr. Reyes?
Yes, it'll be divided by 5 or 6 entities, depends on how many entities get involved, right?
Well, right now, we only have a partnership of 2 people, so I think it's gonna be either split 2 ways or split with a formula.
Right. Right. Mr. Atkins?
What would the formula for sharing that cost be?
Currently, we're operating on an 86-14, we're paying 86% of the costs.
Okay, so assume we continue down that path, because that's all we have as reference. We're really going to let this agreement get held up, or we're going to negotiate, not get held up. We're actually going to negotiate with the city to fund 14% of $38,000 without just doing the study. I mean, what are we talking here? $7,000?
I agree.
I thought it was splitting the cost, is what I was thinking.
And I thought it was gonna be done no matter what. It
Right.
wasn't, you know, the study was supposed to be done, and then if the city wants to chip in their portion, then we're fine.
So again,
Mr. Mansur?
going back to the motion, I was wondering if Trustee Massey would be just willing to amend his motion to spend up to $40,000 to commission the allocation study without making a comment about splitting the cost between entities.
Yes, yes, trustee Mansour.
Okay.
So your motion states, trustee Massey, that we're not going to ask the city to contribute to this.
I thought it
No,
did.
No.
no,
That's what Al just said.
Well,
He said regardless.
No, I'm sorry, Al?
We were going to go forward with the study regardless of if we get a contribution from anyone else.
but we are still
Yes.
gonna ask for the contribution.
We'll ask for it. yeah.
Yes, that's what I understood him to say. Absolutely, trustee Mansour.
So we need to make sure that the motion does a couple of
So now
things.
we're
One
up
is
to $40,000 to
Well,
let the city know.
that it does a couple of things. One is we ask the city, do they want to participate? And secondly, we're going to pay for it if they don't. So one way or the other,
Yes.
it's getting done.
Yes,
Okay.
Supervisor.
Any issues with that, Mr. Laddie or Mr. Lemata?
I don't have any issues with it.
I have one, I need to do a budget amendment so that I don't have authorization to spend that money because I don't have it budgeted, and it's gonna have to
Right.
come out of an account, so we'll probably need to do a budget amendment tomorrow to move that forward. In order for me to have authorization to spend, we're not
Right.
legally supposed to spend money until we've authorized it, and right now I don't have an account with that set aside in it. So I'd like to make that, I'll have to have a budget amendment for tomorrow night's.
Okay.
Fine.
All right.
It's fine.
It's understandable. Any other discussion on that motion?
So what we're authorizing, basically, is that we're going to spend up to $40,000 because we absolutely know what it costs to run our fire department. We absolutely positively know what it costs our Grand Blanc Township residents to run our fire department. So we're going to allocate $40,000 to basically let the city realize what it really costs them if they want to have a fire department.
Now, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
when Mr. Lemata explained the purpose of this study, I took it to mean that the analysis is going to be more, the usable analysis for us, because we absolutely do know what it costs to run the department.
Yep.
What we've had trouble with over the last several months and years plus several months is agreeing on what the actual allocation should be. And we created a formula, an effort to try to find an equitable formula back when the first millage was proposed. And it turns out that formula wasn't taking into account all of the issues, including DPW issues, including fixtures in buildings and things like that. And so what this study will do, at least in my mind, is it's going to be a very detailed explanation of who should pay for what and why. That is what we already know what it costs to run, but we don't know who should pay for what and why. And that's how we ended up with a fair amount of discussion and disagreement about what the amount should be that we contribute and they contribute. And that's what this study will do in my mind.
I
Absolutely.
think that's a very good explanation.
Yes,
Mr. Laddie.
yes.
But, so we have a motion, it's been seconded, we've had some discussion, ready to take a vote?
I'd just like to add one more.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, I just really hope, you know, the best way to thank the residents for approving this millage is to actually act and do something in terms of shoring up whatever the partnership is or the joint funding between us or the city, whatever it's gonna look like. And it's just going to be, let's just hope it doesn't stretch out into 2019 and we can actually get some results without the city stalling or, you know, or without this third party taking, you know, hopefully they can get it done in a couple months.
Well, I think we have a little bit of a time frame that we need to have it done in, don't we? I mean, we're looking at this millage, if it's starting to be collected next year, we kind of need the study to be done by December, right?
Well,
Mr. Laddie?
and as Mr. Lehman has explained to us, again, we are falling behind every year and every month and every day, theoretically, we're falling behind on our obligations for our equipment, and so the sooner the better. I think the millage will be collected in the winter tax bill, so I think our treasurer will start seeing that money coming in by February. And I think Mr. Lehman, you probably would like to see that thing, obviously sooner rather than later, but your outside line for budget issues would be what, November, October,
Yeah,
December?
so one of the things, getting that agreement together and getting it through legal, and even if it went in a direction that was unanticipated, that we went our separate ways and say our partners in the city decided that the cost allocation, they wanted to go on their own, which is certainly an option for them. From a budgeting standpoint, we're putting the budget together now. It has to be delivered to the board September 1st. All this would require is that we know for a fact that it takes more than 1 mil to run that fire department. So I will be allocating that 1 mil plus the additional funds coming in. We will hold that in an account within our capital projects fund to start our capital reserves as we work through this if we went into the budget year. So that we have the ability to do so by setting aside that money in our capital reserves and still operating, you know, much like we're operating now, because the whole point of this was to be able to get capital. We need the capital reserve funding. And so we can do our operations much like we're doing right now. We've got the mill coming in, we're gonna have to take that out of the general fund and keep our capital reserve fund set aside. We'll have to do a budget amendment as we reach an agreement, and that changes because you will have adopted the budget in November or December, and so that's, I mean, that's neither here nor there. We can do that, we can make that adjustment at any time. Being able to try to anticipate what that's gonna be and build it into the budget now is an impossibility. Just know that we will have to do a budget amendment in 2019 once we've decided the path that this township is taking on providing fire prevention protection services for the community.
Ms. Lane?
Mr. Lemata, I would like to clarify my understanding of one thing. We're going to be collecting the additional $500,000 with the December 1st, 2018 tax bill. You said you're going to put that money for the equipment to ensure that we have it for equipment in the capital improvement fund. That will be here at the township, are you saying? So that we are ensuring that it's safeguarded for equipment?
Of course, it's not, there's nothing in the agreement that's sending additional money to the fire commission for any reason. This is a township millage, it comes to the township. You guys, even now, you guys get the money in, and how you determine to provide fire prevention and protection for your residents is up to this board on how you want to expend those funds. You could contract out with somebody, you can have your own fire department, you can do whatever. That doesn't impact that. It's just that as we start to move through and the money is collected, we just need the residents to know that the whole gist of this was to build that capital reserve fund, and that is what we will do with that money. And how that works out, whether we continue on in the current agreement with some changes, whether we sell the city services based upon the cost allocation study, or we go our separate ways, that doesn't change what we're gonna do with the funds that we're capturing in the new millage.
Right.
Well-
Yeah, Ms. Lane brings up a good point again, in that we want to reassure our residents that we are not going to be paying an inordinate amount of money just because we passed a millage, that all that money goes immediately. We're gonna renegotiate this agreement if that's possible, otherwise we go our separate ways. We'll have this allocation study to help us to figure out what that allocation should be, and then based on that, I guess, everybody gets to make their own decision. Mr. Lemina?
So the one thing the board should just be aware of, and David can address this, but we're not operating under the current agreement once we start collecting that millage. We're sending out with the December tax bills, and the current agreement, that resolution has to be changed from our standpoint regardless, because it talks about a funding mechanism that's no longer viable based upon the actions that our voters took in supporting that fire millage. So there's no possibility that we delay it for a year or 6 months or whatever. We'll ask you to rescind that resolution and create a new resolution at the very least as we move forward, because we cannot operate under that agreement. It's changed by the voters' actions of last
So
night.
when will we need to do that, Mr. Laddie?
Well, I think what I think what will help us do that is this study. Because again, that paragraph, and it's in our ordinance, and the city has the same ordinance language. Paragraph talks about how we funded it with a half mil from the city, half mil from the township millage, and then half from each general fund, and that has changed. Because now our residents are paying a mill, and their residents are still paying a half mil. So we need to figure out what are we gonna base the allocation on? We think it's gonna be this study that's gonna tell us that instead of looking at it from a resident's perspective, it's gonna give us the cost perspective. What does it actually cost the township? What should it actually cost the city? And we're gonna have to plug those numbers into the ordinance. And if we're gonna have a joint agreement in that ordinance, we're gonna have to agree on that. If we don't agree on that, then we'll be taking a different direction, potentially. But I think that we need to come up with a new funding formula. I think that study's gonna do it, and it's gonna shed a lot of light on what the actual cost sharing agreement should be.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take a vote. Doesn't mean we have to end discussion, but let's go ahead.
It wasn't a resolution, therefore it can just be a voice vote, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. But again, I want to reiterate, I know we've gotten into, the details a little bit, but
Thank you.
I'd like to give a huge thanks to our residents for their vote of confidence. I've seen this reported in the news a number of places, and I know that our residents are putting a huge amount of faith in us that this money is going to be wisely spent. Yes, they believe in our fire department, but they also want us to be very judicious in how we spend their tax dollars, and we're not taking that responsibility lightly. I think the study that we're going to commission is to make sure that we're not subsidizing other entities, and that we are being committed to spending their money well. And I know our fire chief makes sure that his budgets are, and the fire commission go over those closely, so we're going to ensure that money's spent well, but we want to thank the taxpayers for the trust that they placed in us and our firefighters to do this job. Ms. Lane?
I agree with everything you said so well, Mr. Supervisor. I think the definite assurance of our support for the fire department and our respect for how the voters voted is because the township treasurer, Mr. Guzak, watches pennies very, very scrupulously, and it will be available when we need to make a deposit on that first fire truck.
What was the end result of the vote? 71%,
Something like that.
roughly? So 71% of those that voted in favor of the millage, which I think is a pretty good mandate. So, okay. Any other issues with regard to this that was before us? Okay. Thank you. We're going to review the Township Board agenda now for tomorrow evening. And we are going to have a privileged presentation. We have a resident that's celebrating their 100th birthday here in Blanc Township, and that's Louise Hubler. And so we have a resolution to present. And we also have a resolution commending and thanking Susan DeVerney, Terry Donnelly, and Doreen Woodbury for their dedication, commitment, and service to our Grand Blanc Township, working on our elections. Then also we have an update from Rose Pest Solution on our mosquito program, which that millage passed
Also
as
was
well,
approved.
and by a significant margin. We will have approval of our minutes. We have the consent agenda, which we will have our treasurer's report that's in the packet. We have a motion to approve the hosting and maintenance agreement for Census R&I meter reading systems for $13,261. We have the motion to approve Energy Shield's bid to install spray foam roof system on the DPW Barn 1 for $41,300. Authorize Township Superintendent to execute all related contracts and documents. We also have approval of a program to repair catch basins, which we will need to approve $39,121 for that program. Another item E, the board will also consider a request from Grand Blanc Township Historic District Commission to use the historic Perry Homestead and Nature Trail property for the 2018 Perry Pioneer Days, which will include animal rides, entertainment, petting zoo, what have you, and they're looking for an expenditure of $500 from the account that's listed. And then we'll move in, yes.
So could I take a minute with the consent
Sure.
agenda?
Absolutely.
So I have three things. First, to Mr. Limita, in terms of the funds, the treasurer's report, is there any revenue or expense line item that is outside of the range in terms of overspending or under receiving or any of that based on where we are in the year?
No, the budget's actually through July 31st now is still, everything's in range as far as on a departmental cost. I think the only concern that I would have at this point is the clerk's budget's got, we'll see what happened with this election, because it was involved. They were here late last night, and we've got another big election coming up in November, so we'll keep an eye on that. We may have to do some kind of budget allocation from somewhere for additional funding for the clerk's department, but at this point we are where we should be.
Okay, thanks. Second item, on item number D, the catch basin program, how do we determine, or how is it determined which catch basins are put into this repair program?
Mr. Sears, you'd like to comment?
Absolutely. Good evening.
Good evening.
The decision is made jointly between myself and the road commission. What they do and what I do is we take a list of complaints basically that we've gotten over the years for residents who are concerned about any kind of damage to their property or trip hazards or any kind of hazards that could exist with the basins. We go through, our foreman for the road commission actually sees every catch basin in the township every year, but between him and his crew. So he has a list, I have a list. We get together throughout the year, we add to the list, and we come up with the biggest priorities basically. And then obviously the township has a budget for catch basins. That's what I tell them we have to stay within, and that's the number we do.
So the county puts money into this as well?
Correct, it's a 50-50 project, so we're not paying for the whole thing. The road commission matches whatever we spend.
So we're putting in 39,000, right?
Yes.
So,
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering how those particular catch basins were decided, year to year.
And they're the ones that we have the most concern for right now in the township. I mean, we could do hundreds of them, but these are the ones that stick out the most to us.
so maybe the ones that the road is degrading because of it and
Mostly,
swallowing up?
yeah, mostly if they affect private property or there's kids playing, or these are all in subdivisions, so they pose the biggest safety issue or potential damage to private property.
So this would be different than this drainage issue that we've heard a couple times between like the Oaks at Woodfield and those
Yes.
property. That's a totally a
Absolutely.
different thing.
100% different, yep.
Okay,
These are all catch basins within subdivisions.
okay,
So,
Those types of drainage issues that you're referring to really belong to the Drain Commission.
okay.
so a catch basin, just so everybody's clear, is basically what you see as far as a storm sewer, is that?
Yep, within, inside curbs, and subdivision streets and ditches, just anything that collects water.
So
and
what
takes it to
about the
source.
storm sewer, you know, you have the covered sewer, and I've seen some of those that have collapsed down that are in the middle of a road or something like that. That's
It
not-
depends. Some of those are the townships,
Mhm.
belong to the sewer department, some of them belong to the road commission. The road commission generally takes care of those and repairs
Okay.
those. If they're in the middle of the road and there's a problem with them, generally they're the townships.
Okay.
And we usually fix them pretty quickly if we know
Right.
there's an issue.
Thank you.
Yep.
One
That's
more,
it.
one
Go
more.
ahead.
So the last one has to do with Historic District Commission, use of the historic Perry, did we decide on a previous,
Farmstead,
to call it Farmstead?
that's what legally that the state came back and said that it has to be referred to as for the historic designation.
Thank you. I'm all set, thank you.
Yeah, and we're, you know, one of the things you may see that $500, you know, why are they coming to us for that approval? But when we have outside, you know, they're a great group of people, and they're just getting in the process of, hey, we need to submit for approval on these budget items, so,
And the expense is a benefit for the township.
right,
Mr. Chair?
yes. Mr.
Um,
Lane, Ms. Lane?
This morning, when we were talking, I believe, and Mr. Limita can correct me, this particular account, 803-100-740-800, are donations that people have made to the Historic Commission for different things throughout the years since it's been formed. We have a separate line item on the budget material that you see that Mr. Limita established last year for $10,000 that takes in heating, air conditioning, mowing, and what have you. So this particular account is being paid from their donations from people who support the Perry Farmstead.
Mr. Limita?
And, I mean, obviously, this is well within my spending authority, but because we are trying to establish this new system, and I think it's really critical that we help educate the Historic District Commission that they have no statutory authority to expend funds in any way, shape, or form, that they can't move forward or commit to spending money. It can only be done through the township, and through this process, certainly I could have signed off on this and moved it forward instead of having to come to board business, but I'm trying to establish for everybody's perspective and keep it in the public eye that this is how those funds will be expended, that we want to make sure that there's a formal process, that they don't have any authority to spend money. They will make requests to the township. If it's within my spending authority, I'll consider it, but we still have yet to really establish a promotional account or funds like that, were really the money that we had set aside. This is from their donation funds, which is no problem, but the rest of it was really set aside for minor repairs, utilities, and that kind of thing.
All right, thank you. And it's well within the mission that they established in their plan. Under operational issues, the board will consider a motion setting a date for the Truth in Taxation public hearing on proposed 2018 millage levy of 6.8250 mills for September 13th, 2018. Notice must be published 6 days in advance of the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I will move the, we're not doing that
Right,
tonight.
we just need to do it on the one motion.
Right,
but,
that's part of my job.
So, yes, Mr. Limita?
I just wanted to point out that the reason that the agenda in the packet that went out didn't have anything in, we had to wait for the turnout from the voters yesterday and get the official results in. So once we got the approval that both fire and mosquito had gone in, that's what we were waiting for. That's why those were plugged into the agenda late, and I printed out copies for you. We'll re-upload the packet tomorrow morning, so that I wanted to wait and see if there's any other changes to the agenda. And then we will re-upload the packet tomorrow, so from the public standpoint, you'll have an updated packet with those numbers to include the truth in taxation numbers and the millage request.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Limita. Any other questions with regard to the truth in taxation? The
I
next,
have a question
Sure.
about that. Okay, so mosquito and the fire, we saw those on the ballot yesterday.
yes.
The Parks and Rec capital improvement, was that on the ballot?
No, these
No,
are
we
all
voted on
bills we
that
paid
2 years ago.
for the whole year.
Okay. And what about the police?
That's a
That's
20-year-old
an ongoing.
millage.
That's
That-
expiring in 20.
2019, that expires.
So these don't represent increases over the current levels? It's
Well-
extra because I understand it's extra, but it's not an
Right.
increase.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the fire millage and the mosquito, we just voted on yesterday, obviously, and we had to wait to see if those were approved.
Yep.
So item B is basically the detail for that. The board shall consider a resolution to authorize an increase levy of 6.8250 mils on property located within the township for the tax year 2018, comprised of, and then it goes into the detail. So we'll go through that tomorrow and approve that. Any other questions on the millage, on the increased levy? Item C, the board will consider a motion to approve the ballot language for the police millage and an election date of either November 2018 or November 2019. Mr. Lima, with regard to this police millage, we've talked about what date would be best to do this, and that's probably more of just timing than anything else, but we currently have a millage rate of 1 mil, or actually 0.9026.
With the heavy rollback.
Right.
So, before the board, for your consideration, there was a lot of talk earlier this year of whether or not we were going to follow up with the police millage in November, and at that time the board had kind of decided that the fire millage was the most important, and that was going to be on the August ballot. The police millage would be on the November ballot. If the police millage is going to go on the November ballot, we need to know first what the millage amount is going to be. Is it just a renewal of the 0.9 whatever,
Right.
with the Hadley Amendment? Are you asking to roll that back to the 1 mil? Are you going to increase it to 1.5 mils, for example, which would be my recommendation, by the way, for the board to consider 1.5 mils for 10-year period, with the idea that the additional half mil that you'd be requesting would be money that would be then used to go after the unfunded liabilities associated with the operation of the police department. If you look at our pension liability, there's about $8 million in unfunded liability, and with the $31 million based upon our 2014 evaluation of our OPEB, $21 million of that is associated with the police department. So it's a considerable amount, obviously, but they are a bigger portion of our general fund budget. I would like to have the board at least consider that rather than just do a renewal, that you would consider 1.5 mils and give us the opportunity to take that extra funding and apply it towards the unfunded liabilities of both OPEB and the pension plan, so we can be much more aggressive in paying down those. Whether you do that at November, if that was going to happen, you would have to approve that tomorrow night, because it has to be into the clerk's office.
No, it has to be to the county
To the county,
clerk.
county clerk's office no later than the 14th of this month. You could also delay this to a November or a May or November election in 2019. The millage rules through 2019, so we're going to continue to collect the 1 mil. But those are the decisions that the board needs to make. It came out now because we had the answer back on the fire millage, and the board had previously said that they would consider it on November. If you want to consider it on November, it's got to be done tomorrow night, so we can get it into the county in time. Or you guys could make the decision that you want to delay it and hold it on a special election. We assume the school board will be holding some elections in 2019, and so you would have the opportunity to run it on that same ballot.
But then we would be paying $23,000 for a special election.
Yeah. Ms. Lane and then Mr. Massey.
I already have confirmation from the Grand Blanc schools that in May of next year, they're going to be putting a renewal of one of their millages on the ballot. if the school, as they did this year, put on a special millage, the cost that they are paying for us is $23,000. In addition to that, they have to pay the county for ballots, computer things. So they are paying more than $23,000 because they also have to pay the city of Burton and Mundy Township where it extends in. If we join with the township, with the schools, then state law says we shoulder all the costs, so it would be the $23,000 that you saw for the schools, plus the other things we have to pay the county for printing ballots and ordering ballots and updating the computers and things like that, which I estimate would be closer to $30,000.
So it's gonna be the same cost to us regardless of whether we run it with the school or not.
Correct.
Mr. Massey?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a comment and get some kind of consensus tonight that this be removed from the agenda. Because at this point, I don't have all the information that I need to go to the residents, so I would like for it to be removed.
So you wouldn't wanna do it in November then? You would
No.
wanna do it next year?
Yes.
Is what you're suggesting?
I would just like to know what the consensus is tonight.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get that here, because I think tomorrow night we're gonna be short a couple board members, and I'd like to get a consensus this evening on whether they would see it, best, in a special election next year, or whether we wanna put it on the November ballot. Mr. Thomas?
I do not believe in special elections. It's, August, would there be an election in August?
Any election next year, whether it's May, August, or November, will be a special election.
That's why we picked this November.
That's right. Initially, even with the schools, when they wanted to go in May, we didn't want to do a special election. What I recall was the philosophy of this board.
So if we don't do it this November,
It'll be up
and
to
we have
next
to
year
make our
sometime.
decision tonight, basically, we should, because I think we should do it tonight if we do it this November
Well, yeah.
with our two board members.
Yeah.
Boy, I really, really agree with Joe, but I really, really have an issue with special elections.
Mr. Mansour?
So I was probably one of the first or most vocal about special elections because a lot of the decisions are driven by a very small proportion of the voters, and I still feel that way. However, coming off of the amount of work that we know that it took to get the residents and everyone comfortable about the additional cost of the fire commission cost, the fact that we really worked on that, for about a year and a half. Coming at this with a similar kind of increase for police, which I think will bear that we will need, but doing that on the heels of it and without all of the kind of due diligence, I think it would be hard for me to really support that and really talk to the residents about why it's the right thing to do.
Let's just go down the line here. Mr. Atkins, anything, thoughts?
I think I'm in the same boat. I'd kind of like to get through, at least one, this year's budget process and see really where we stand. I think we really need to look at everything. When we're talking about increase of millage mainly for unfunded liabilities, I think that right there, it's different than saying, you need more officers, you need more equipment, and there's reasons for it. When we're starting to look at under or unfunded liabilities and tie a millage to that, or those proceeds to that, I think we really need to do a little more due diligence in the budget process before making that quick of a decision.
Mr. Buzak, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is true that we need to educate the folks to show them why we need to do this. So even though it does cost more, we don't have any time because there's a short period of time between now and December. So it probably should be put to next year even.
Ms. Lane?
Am going to defer when I'm done speaking to our attorney. When the police millage was approved, it was 20 years ago. So it will be collected December of this year with the winter taxes, and then it will be collected next December of 2019. That would be the end of that millage. However, like we just did with the mosquito millage, we didn't put it on a special election. We rolled it over. We could roll this election even over to 2020, and when I anticipate it being a presidential year with at least the presidential primary, an August primary, and November, and still maybe even somebody wanting to do something in May. Those are the 4 dates that you would have in a presidential year, different than from any other. And the residents were very appreciative of our efforts with the fire department. I assume they will be exactly the same for our police department because it's a quality police department as well. But that would give us time. I know it would generate, December of this year, if it were to pass, about $600,000, and another $600,000 December of 2019. But if you prefer to wait and do it on a regular election, you're giving up that amount of money to prepare for it in 2020.
Well, we're up for election that year too, so trying to push a millage and run for our own office might be a little bit of a challenge as well. Mr. Laddie, anything to add to that?
No, Ms. Lane is exactly right. I mean, you will be funded as far as your existing millage until December of 2019. And then whatever if you do something in 2020, then you'll collect that in December of 2020. So you do have that option.
Yeah. I do want to applaud Mr. Limita for, his aggressiveness at attacking our unfunded liabilities. I think, that is a priority of this board, is to get those down. And we do have, the state looking at us now, and, every municipality looking at their unfunded liabilities, and in some cases asking for corrective action plans and reviewing those plans. And Mr. Lehman has been very diligent in making sure that we're negotiating contracts that are favorable towards lowering that debt. And so I want to applaud him for bringing that forward. And it sounds like the consensus is that we not put it on the November ballot. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Question.
Yeah, Mr. Atkins.
Maybe Ms. Lane can educate me on something. So what would be, if this was a 20-year millage, and we know the police department is, our largest portion of our budget, why is it that we go for 10 or 20-year millages? Why wouldn't this just be part of our, whatever the dollar increase needs to be to operate the department and fund the liabilities going forward? Why wouldn't this be a fixed millage and we don't have to talk about it every decade? Or
I'll let Mr. Laddie.
Thank you. That's what I was going to ask you to defer to.
Yeah, we can't exceed 20 years on a millage. It's not legal to do. So the most you can go out on a millage is 20 years.
Or cities can,
This is an extra voted millage.
correct.
Well, let me just comment too, because I want the public to be aware. Mr. Limita, what is the budget for our police?
Complete with the 7/10 of a mil we set aside from our operating to pay the police bond on the building, it's about $8.3 million a year.
And this millage raises approximately.
With the heavily rollback, about $1.1 million.
So this millage doesn't cover our operation, obviously, of our police. It touches a little bit, but.
It was 1/8 of what it costs us annually.
Right, so I just want to make sure that because I think, we have people that believe that, well, our fire millage covers our fire operation, our police millage. The police are funded out of our general fund is basically the way that works.
Part of that's just for our law enforcement, we have excellent law enforcement here, and it's been one of the responses that prior township boards have made to the community. They wanted that law enforcement, and they wanted the type of programs that law enforcement
Absolutely.
offers. We have a police department here that is respected not only regionally but across the state. And that's one of the things that's been responsive to what township residents have asked us for. And so, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can compare us to other like-sized communities, and you can find anything from, $3 million to, $8 million. But it is being responsive to the residents, and so, yeah, with our millage, I mean, you're not gonna ask for 7 mills to
Right.
cover police operations. That would, we couldn't do it, it's already gonna exceed it, we use it out of our general fund. This really 1 mill was designed 20 years ago to support operations to move forward. Here we are 20 years later, and we're looking at it. Well, the biggest challenge I have with law enforcement right now, or with the police department, is no different than the rest of what we have in the general fund and with our governmental funds, is unfunded liabilities. And with Public Act 202 and all the changes to the GASB rules about reporting, obviously it's become much more tip of your tongue. People are seeing it. We're putting in our financial reports. And with Public Act 202, for example, we were, based on the way the state treasury calculates, we were 63% funded. So we were lucky. We were above that 60% funded threshold, so I don't have to apply for a waiver there. With our OPEB, we were only shown at 13% funded, and then there's also a ratio between your annual required contribution divided by your governmental fund revenue. We were at 18%. You had to be below 12%, or else you got 40% funded and below that threshold, and we didn't meet it. So I'm filling out the waiver form now. You will have a resolution before you on August 28th. If the state grants us our waiver based upon a request on the actions that we've already taken, hallelujah, we'll keep aggressively going after it like we are. If they don't, we go before the Municipal Stability Board, and I have to make a case for our corrective action plan, and we have to deliver that, and I'll have to go deliver that to that board. Things that you guys should be aware of, this is all part of that new reporting, and it's part of that Public Act 202. One of the reasons I'm asking about the consideration of the additional millage for the police department is so that we can aggressively go after that, because our assumptions are changing. And if our discount rate were to go lower than what we're currently using for our MERS defined benefit plan at 7.5%, and don't forget that our assumptions are getting shortened by a year every year on our, across both OPEB and our pensions. So as we do that, we're going to continue to fund as aggressively as we can, but there's a potential that if we don't do something a little bit more, we could drop below that 60% threshold and end up with a corrective action plan, both on the defined benefit plan and on our OPEB. Now, the board has done an excellent job for the last several years in taking the additional funds that we have out of the general fund reserve and aggressively going after those, but that's part of the consideration, and that's why I floated that out there. Now, if we wait 2 years, do we lose $1.2 million potentially that we could have gone after it? Sure we do, but it's not like we're not doing anything. The board has taken decisive and action has given us the direction that that's where we are to be looking for, not opening up new programs or creating new things. It's about aggressively going after that unfunded liabilities, and until I'm told otherwise, we'll continue to look at that when we put the budgets together.
Mr. Thomas?
So, through you to the superintendent, leave it up. So the ballot language for the millage would state that this $0.5 increase would be for unfunded liability?
I would caution against that, because it's not, I mean, when you're spending $8 million for funding operations, you're asking for 1.5 mils, or you're asking for 1 mil. You're funding operations, and part of that operation is paying down unfunded liability. Now, the board certainly through resolution can direct staff that this is where we intend to place all the money. We can tell people that that's what we're going to do with the money. I would caution about putting into the millage language, because you're trying to set aside $0.5 mil out of 1.5 mils, and really your operation is $8.3 million and is probably going to grow over the years. I don't think it's necessary. I think that you can handle the same thing through motion or resolution, saying we intend to aggressively go after that. And those resolutions count as far as documentation for our waiver request through the Public Act 202. As the board making a resolution is just as strong as that.
Mr. Massey?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I'm incorrect, please correct me.
Okay.
as I recall, a few months ago, I believe the chief testified, based on the marijuana farms that are going up, and we are subject to be faced with, crime goes up. I believe that's what the chief said. I'm sorry, what goes up? Crime increases when marijuana farms are planted. All the states that have marijuana farms.
With the legalization of marijuana, I think the discussion was that probably the assumption is that crime will increase.
I think that's a safe assessment. We've seen that in other states where marijuana is legal.
Right.
So I think we are leaving that out of this equation, and I think we should keep that in mind, that whatever millage we are considering, we have to include.
Well, certainly, you know, we've been very good at, our police have been at containing crime, but I think nationally, I don't know if crime statistics continue to increase, but at least the media coverage makes it look like it's getting worse. But I know and I agree with Mr. Lemata that I think a big reason why people like and love to live here is because they feel safe. I mean, it actually is very moving to read some of the people that, you know, I don't know if all of you saw the editorial that an individual wrote about what they overheard in a conversation recently about Blanc Township. And this woman wrote an editorial that was posted on Facebook and defending our township. And the people that wrote in and said, I agree with you, was amazing. And, you know, a number of them were, we love living in Blanc because we can go for walks at night without worrying about, you know, crime. And it was really touching to read a lot of those testimonials on how people trust living in our neighborhoods, and that's because of our police, you know, and the atmosphere that we create. So I think, you know, the police millage is critical. I agree it's not getting any easier to police, and you know, hopefully our surrounding communities take it as seriously as we do, because obviously if they don't, their crime's gonna, you know, cause us to have to be stronger. Mr. Thomas?
I agree with getting back onto the consensus of the board. I agree that we should move this to 2019.
Okay.
And then let's work, maybe form another task force and see what exactly the millage amount is that we should request.
Okay. It sounds like that's the consensus, is to wait at least till next year, and we'll form a task force that looks into it a little bit further too. Mr. Mansour?
I have two things. First, I am very curious if we can do something to actually quantify for the board and for us to share with our residents what the impact would be of a bigger, I'm going to call it embrace, but coming to the township or coming to the state of more legalized marijuana. I don't know if we can extrapolate from that, but I would certainly like to make
to quantify. State that again, Mr. Mansour. I don't quite understand.
What I'd like, I mean, we talked about it a little bit here about what the local impact is in terms of cost, in terms of policing, to bringing on more legalized marijuana. And so I would like to know if we would be able to project that. So we would quantify the increase so that, you know, our residents have all the information that they need as they consider these kind of ballot initiatives. I think one of which is coming up in November, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it will be on the November ballot.
So
I don't know, Chief, here, why don't you come on up here and we'll ask you your professional opinion.
okay, we want it.
Is there a way to quantify what our increased costs will be if this measure passes in November, or are there like communities we can look at in other states that went before and after legalization? And
Yeah, I think it's difficult, but can it be done? Possibly, but we'd have to look at other states that have legalized marijuana and then similar communities. I think the challenge would be finding similar communities. You know, there's a lot of 40-man police departments around the country. There's only one Blanc Township. And how we do things could be totally different than how another department does it, so where you compare apples to apples. That would be the challenge.
Okay.
That's fair enough, but by the same token, you know, I think you can maybe get a general assessment
Sure.
of what the before and after
Sure.
is when we take certain kinds of actions in the township.
Which may lend itself to the millage that we look at.
It may lend itself to that too.
And while, you know, the board took action not to have any facilities here in the township, other municipalities surrounding the township did not take that same action.
That's right.
And, you know, crime is mobile, and certainly people are mobile, and you know, a lot of suspects that commit crimes in the township are not township residents.
Right.
Well, we're kind of in a pathway between a couple of major cities too,
Absolutely.
so people passing through.
So
Mr. Levina?
it may be quantifiable in one way, Chief, is that if you look through law enforcement information and networks and find other communities like Colorado or somebody who's done it, and if there's just a, you know, an average impact they see on the state, or, you know, it's not gonna be exact for us, but maybe it says that there's a 12% increase in, you know, funding required for law enforcement to deal with it. It would be an interesting anecdotal evidence,
Right.
at least to make public.
And we were focusing on crime here, but the other issue is traffic safety. People that consume marijuana and are on our roadways endangering other motorists. States that have legalized marijuana have seen an increase in crashes and an increase in fatalities.
Ancillary
And I
costs
can almost
for-
assure that
sure.
that will occur in Michigan when and if marijuana becomes legalized.
Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, I'd just like to add as well, to Trustee Mansour's comment about task force and kind of research the size and scope, or the size of the funding that the police department may need going forward. I'd like to also mention, you know, if you look at the DDA and some of the things that are gonna, you know, potentially be coming to the township, I know, you know, instead of looking at it just from an underfunded liability perspective, we need to make sure that the police department is staffed for the growth that could be coming up. You know, you look at Magna, that's building down in the township there, and, you know, some of the traffic issues and stuff they've had. I know that ties up resources, and so I think it's a little more than just underfunded liability. You know, we are on the path to grow, so I think
That's a very good point, Mr. Atkins. I mean, we're looking at, you know, growing, you know, significantly, and this is a 10-year millage that we're looking at, or longer, and you go that far out, where are we gonna be? And we're not going to be the same size we are now in 10 years. So, another good thing, but, yeah, I appreciate both those. I think the marijuana, you know, maybe other legislation out there that could impact our
Sure.
funding and requirements as well. You know, the transportation of marijuana is going to be an issue. I mean, we've got somebody right now that, for transportation, right? I mean, they check semis that are coming through for weight limits and things like that. I mean, that's gonna be a whole industry in itself, is transporting marijuana and the enforcement of that, so maybe some good things we gotta take a look at and take into consideration with funding. Anything else with regard to that? Thank you, Chief,
All right, thank
appreciate it. Hey, great job last night too. I don't know if everybody had the chance to go to the National Night Out, but the police department, I know the DPW participated in that as well. Just a fabulous event. I don't know how many people were there, but there were hundreds, and just a fabulous event. I wish we could do that a couple times a year. It's just a great community.
Yeah, no,
building
I
event.
appreciate it. Thanks for Chief Burdette and
Yeah,
Director
Chief
Sears
Burdette
for
too.
having their
Yeah.
staff there and help us out and highlight some of the services we provide the residents here. So
Yeah,
it was well attended and well received.
I didn't mean to leave the fire department out, so yeah, the fire department was there in force, and looked great out there, so.
Great, thank you.
thanks. Okay, anything else on the police millage? We're gonna take a further look at that and look at that.
Before you move forward, so the
Yes.
consensus is I'm gonna remove it from the agenda, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so item D, the board will consider the resubmission of bids for Parks and Recreation Pavilion floor replacement and field project. Everybody received those. Mr. Lemata, you want to discuss those at all?
You got a form sitting in front of you that Rowe Engineering put together. You also had in your packet one that Kathy had also put together, and you actually had the bids in there. So I think it's important for you to just note that you asked Mr. Wheatley if he would contact the two bidders and remove the pavilion floor from the contract and then bring the bids back to you. They both responded. Kennedy Excavating reduced their original base bid for the floor and the field by $30,476. LA Construction also responded. They reduced their base bid $105,950. So if you're trying to determine how much the floor cost, it costs somewhere between $30,476 and $105,950. However, knowing the price of concrete, that floor costs a lot more than even the $30,000. It's just a fact, just the pure price of concrete and the square yards required there. Like we suspected, once they knew each other's bids, they've both responded and lowered the bid. I was surprised with LA Construction. They were pretty aggressive. They knew they were $100,000 more, and they came back at it. This is what you have before you, and where the board wants to take it. You do have Director Edson here, as well as Mr. Wheatley from Rowe Engineering, who can answer any other questions that you might have.
Mr. Lehman, just a clarification, and maybe this is more of Mr. Laddie's question, but to go back to the original bid would be concerning in terms of legality. Is that?
It would be concerning to do that, but it was also concerning when we took the action to go back to both bids and ask them to break it out, because what we effectively did was reject both of those bids, and they both agreed to resubmit to us. It would be awkward to go back and say, well, now after you've both broken these bids out separately, we want you to go back and honor the original bid. They're under no obligation to do that if they want to do that. And by the way, I mean, I know why you did this, but it just turned out, I think, that you got the information you wanted, and the low bidder was also the low bidder on the rebid, so you don't have a significant issue in that regard. And also, I think Mr. Wheatley may share with you that he may have delicately broached the topic to one of the providers that they might consider that original bid, but that again is not the favorable path.
Okay. Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Supervisor, seeing that we're going to be missing two of our trustees, can we make this motion to accept, I'd like to make a motion tonight to accept Kennedy Excavating bid for $164,566.86.
Support.
Tomorrow?
But it's on the
Well,
agenda for tomorrow night.
yeah.
Is that-
How about, let's get a consensus. I think our board will honor what the consensus is tomorrow. Is that okay with you, Mr. Thomas, or
Well, I think, no, I'd rather just get it done with.
would you?
That way we don't have to take up Ms. Edson and Mr. Wheatley's time tomorrow night.
Okay, I don't know, Ms. Lane? Well,
There's
that's
a
a
motion.
motion,
And
so
there's
he's made a
support.
motion, it's been seconded. Okay, so discussion, Ms. Lane?
I totally support the initial bid that Kennedy Excavating provided, and I think I made it perfectly clear with my vote when you all decided to go back.
Well, we're not there, so.
But I'm still thinking we should go ahead and ask them to, if they are willing to honor the $195,000 for the benefit of Parks and Recreation and financing, because I think it's obvious that when you decide to go out for more cement, you can see it's going to cost a lot more than what was recommended and accepted when we got the original bid.
Well, we've got a motion, so
I know.
if it fails.
I guess
then
I'm
you
voting
can make-
against the motion
Okay.
in order to get
All
the
right.
original bid.
Is there any problem, Mr. Laddie, with us taking a vote on a Tuesday? I know we did that earlier with regard to the fire and the proposal to,
Yeah,
for
I
the
know,
study.
we normally don't do this.
I
right?
know
And but I guess, in understanding that we're gonna have some vacancies tomorrow night, it's not illegal for you to do that.
Right, just
My
not our
question
board.
is that it's been on our agenda and posted, and if either one of the bidders wanted to come in, there may be a reason why you'd want to wait and take that action tomorrow night.
I think we should just do it tonight. I don't want to rescind my motion.
Probably, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
probably, we just, may be better for the committee, the board as a whole, just to wait till tomorrow night. Because we may be breaking a rule that we may regret one day.
Mr. Lemata?
I would just say that it's bad public policy would my concern, Trustee Thomas, just because it makes it so we don't want to lose the public's trust, or we don't want to lose the trust of bidders. We posted it, we said we're going to make a decision on Thursday, and if we make the decision Wednesday, there's always a possibility that one or both would have showed up and asked to have comment before the
I will
discussion.
I will remove my motion, Mr. Supervisor, but I'd like to get a consent from my fellow board members.
Yeah, we can do that. I know Ms. Lane objects to it. Is there anybody else who objects to what Mr. Thomas is proposing, that we approve Kennedy Excavating with the new bids? Ms. Lane's expressed her wishes and her reservations, but I haven't heard anybody else.
I'm supportive of the rebid for Kennedy.
Okay.
I support.
Yeah, I support the new bid.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a consensus and.
Did you remove your second?
I don't think I have to, do I?
Yeah.
What?
He's
Yeah, you-
removing his second.
You guys are removing the motion,
Yeah.
so I
Yes.
understand, but you've made an agreement, you've made a gentleman's agreement by consensus that the majority of you, at least tonight, are in favor of that
Kennedy.
motion coming up tomorrow.
Right,
Knowing also that you'll be 2 members down potentially, but.
right.
But
based
that
on-
doesn't mean I can't try and convince them to change their mind.
That is true.
Because I support Parks and Rec,
That is
and
true.
they goofed.
That is true.
This board did.
Just can't have,
So
violate the
if-
Open Meetings Act with trying.
But if we do go back onto our original bid, you foresee a strong possibility of a lawsuit.
No, it's problematic. It's a possibility. I don't see that it's not a probability, but it's a possibility. It's just not the recommended process.
So as our attorney, you're saying,
We look like we don't know what we're doing.
making a motion on a
Guys,
Tuesday,
that-
on a Wednesday, it should be on Thursday?
Well, so as I understand it, you've had that discussion, Mr. Thomas, you agree to withdraw your motion. Mr. Mansour, do you
Yes.
withdraw your second?
Agreed.
Okay,
And so we have a consensus.
Yeah.
So let's keep moving here. We've got, the next item is what you're hearing from the community, and I know we heard community speak loud and clear on the fire millage. Anybody else hearing anything?
And the mosquito millage.
And the mosquito millage was very supportive. Moving in, I don't know if anybody has any board reports right now, planning,
That,
Mr.
No.
Mr. Thomas, any Parks and Rec?
Nope.
Okay.
I have a couple questions on the written reports, if I
Okay.
can just have a minute.
Let's just finish going through these and then
sorry.
we'll go to that.
Yep.
Mr. Massey, anything further on fire?
No.
Anything on zoning board of appeals, Mr. Atkins?
No.
Mr. Guzak? Ms. Lane?
I am going to be looking again for more young people who want to work from 6 in the morning to maybe, from one morning till 2 a.m. the next morning to work on our elections, because as you know, they are important, they're necessary, they're required, and I am hearing that more of my older generation reliables are deciding they'll stick through November, but we have to replace them and we want to get them well-educated, so.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Lemata, the date that we're having Ms. Stratton come in to do some work with our board is 28th?
23rd.
23rd.
Okay. So anyways, I hope that everybody can make it that date on the 23rd, and we're gonna, it'll be very good, I can tell you that. We did have a meeting this afternoon, Mr. Lemata and I, with Superintendent Clarence Garner from Grand Blanc Schools, our Parks Commission Chair, Mr. Hester, Ms. Edson, our Parks Director, Mr. Lemata and I, and we talked a little bit about our Parks and Rec and and where we see things going with the future a little bit. And so we're gonna try and work a little bit closer together and make sure that communication is improving on an ongoing basis. So that was a very good meeting that we had. With that, Mr. Mansour, you had some questions with regard to written reports?
Yes, two questions on written reports. First, regarding the fire department. In May, the chart indicates that in May, June, and July, there were year-over-year increases in incidents.
Okay.
3 months in a row. So I'm wondering if we know what's going on there.
Chief Burdette, any?
That's right, I have to go back and take a look at it all to see what, it's just the increased number of services, what line item it is on that.
Okay. It's just,
I can get back to you.
when you have 3 months in a row, it kind of looks like a pattern, and this is something we want to obviously try and get ahead of.
Summer months, I'll look at
Well,
it for you.
okay. And, yeah, that was it. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Limita or Mr. Laddie, anything that,
I may have some comments to add for tomorrow, but nothing at this time.
okay,
Or do I?
all right.
I move the meeting be adjourned.
Support?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone.
Jack and Kate.